I was halfway through the same book I'd been pretending to read all week when she stepped into the coffee shop. I knew her already, my landlady, upstairs neighbor, divorced, mid-40s with the kind of calm presence that made people lower their voices without meaning to. We'd only spoken about rent and repairs. Polite, clipped conversations in the hallway. But here, in a public place, she looked different. Less like someone managing a house and more like someone simply existing. She ordered without glancing at the menu. Black coffee. Splash of milk. The barista nodded like it was a ritual. Maybe it was. I kept my eyes on the page, though I'd been on the same sentence for 3 minutes. I felt the chair across from me shift. When I looked up, she wasn't sitting there, of course, just passing by on her way to the counter. Still, I flicked my eyes back down, pretending the sudden pulse in my chest didn't mean anything. When she turned to leave with her coffee, she noticed me. "You live downstairs, don't you?" Her voice was softer than in the hallway. No clipped tones, no businesslike rhythm. "Yeah," I said, closing the book halfway, fingers holding my place. Trying to read, failing miserably. That earned me a small laugh. Not loud, just the kind that sits in the throat. She leaned slightly, enough for the overhead light to catch in her hair. "I won't interrupt your study." "It's not studying," I said quickly. "More like keeping the book company." Another laugh. She touched the rim of her paper cup with her thumb, then nodded toward the chair across from me. "Mind if I sit?" I didn't trust my voice, so I gestured instead. She sat down, setting her coffee carefully on the table. For a second, neither of us spoke. She was close enough that I could smell something faintly floral, something that didn't belong to the coffee shop. My thumb rubbed the edge of the book cover. "You always come here?" she asked. "Most mornings," I said. "Habit, I guess. Easier than making coffee at home." Her gaze dropped briefly to my cup. Half empty, cooling. "Looks like you forget to drink it." I glanced at it too. She was right. "Yeah, happens." It was such a small thing, but the way she said it, observant without judgment, left me feeling seen in a way I hadn't expected. I thought of the half-written messages sitting unsent on my phone, little fragments I'd started to friends I no longer reached out to. "Hey, you free? Thinking of stopping by." Always deleted before sending. She sipped her coffee. Her hands were steady, deliberate. I found myself staring at them, the way her thumb traced the paper seam, then pulled my eyes away before she noticed. "Strange," she said finally, looking out the window. "I've lived above you for almost a year, and this is the first time we've really talked." "Guess it takes caffeine to break the ice," I said. My voice cracked halfway through the joke. She smiled anyway. For a moment, the noise of the shop, the clinking cups, low chatter, faded under the weight of that silence between us. Not uncomfortable, just charged. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen, frowned faintly, then slipped it back into her bag. Before she stood, she met my eyes. "Actually, there's something I wanted to ask you. Later, maybe." "Sure," I said too quickly. She gave a small nod, the kind that carried more weight than a word, and walked out. I stared at my untouched coffee, thumb still rubbing the book's cover, and wondered what she could possibly mean by that. The next time I saw her, it wasn't in the coffee shop. It was at my door. I had just come back from class, arms full of laundry, when she knocked, lightly, almost hesitant. When I opened it, she was holding a package, the cardboard softened from the morning rain. "Delivery guy left this upstairs. Thought you might need it." "Thanks," I said, taking it from her. My hand brushed hers for half a second, and I felt the warmth of her skin longer than I should have. She didn't leave right away. She lingered in the doorway, eyes flicking past me into my apartment, plain, cluttered, the kind of space that didn't yet feel like mine. "You don't have a kettle," she said. It caught me off guard. "What?" She tilted her chin toward the counter behind me. "I didn't hear one. You always come back from the coffee shop. You don't make tea or coffee here." She wasn't wrong. My kitchen was half empty. Bare counters, a lonely French press I hadn't touched in months. I shrugged. Guess I never got around to it. Her lips curved, just slightly. "Come upstairs sometime. I make tea properly." It sounded casual, but something in the way she said it, so direct, so matter-of-fact, made my chest tighten. "Sure," I said, and she gave a short nod before turning back up the stairs. I told myself it was nothing, just neighborly kindness. But that night, I kept hearing her footsteps above me, the creak of the floor as she moved around her kitchen. It was stupid, but the thought that she was awake, just a few feet away, kept me from sleeping. 2 nights later, I found myself knocking on her door. She answered with a surprised smile. You came. Inside, her apartment felt warmer than mine. Not just the temperature, but the way everything seemed lived in. A stack of books on the coffee table, a half-knitted scarf draped over the couch, framed photos that looked both recent and old. She set the kettle on the stove, moving with an ease that made it clear this was her domain. I sat at the edge of her couch, hands folded, trying not to look as restless as I felt. You live here alone? I asked, instantly regretting the bluntness. She didn't flinch. Yes, for a while now. She poured hot water into 2 mugs, the steam rising between us. Divorced. My daughter's at university, out of state. I nodded, unsure what to say. The word hung in the air. Divorced, a quiet marker of experience I couldn't match. She handed me a mug, then sat across from me. What about you? You always look like you're somewhere else when I see you. I gave a small laugh, though it sounded thin. Maybe I am. Classes keep me busy, but I don't know. I don't really go out much. Her eyes softened, like she recognized something in me she wasn't expecting. You're young. That's supposed to be your time to go everywhere, do everything. I stared into my tea, the reflection of the kitchen light rippling on the surface. Maybe I missed that part. A silence followed, long but not empty. She leaned back, cradling her mug in both hands. I watched the way her fingers curved around it, steady, unhurried. I caught myself imagining her hand on mine, her voice softer still, saying something only for me. The thought startled me enough that I set my mug down too quickly, the ceramic clinking against the table. She looked at me then. Really looked, her eyes catching mine for just a beat longer than was safe. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, my throat dry. Just hot. She smiled faintly, and for a moment, it felt like we were both pretending the tea was the only thing warming the room. When I finally left, she walked me to the door. As I stepped out, she reached out, barely touching my arm, the lightest brush of her fingertips. It was nothing, less than nothing, just the neighbor seeing someone out. But walking back downstairs, I couldn't shake it. That small gesture carried more weight than anything either of us had said. And later, lying awake in the dark, I caught myself thinking, I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next time I went upstairs, it wasn't planned. I'd been meaning to ask about the dripping faucet in my kitchen. That was the excuse, at least. But when she opened the door, her hair pulled back, a loose sweater hanging off one shoulder, the words tangled in my throat. The faucet, I finally said. It keeps dripping. She tilted her head, the faintest smile tugging at her mouth. That's what faucets do. I laughed, nervous, and she stepped aside to let me in. Her living room was lit only by a lamp in the corner, casting long shadows over the books and blankets. It felt private in a way that made me too aware of my shoes on her rug, my hands shoved into my pockets. She poured tea without asking. I stood awkwardly until she gestured to the couch. We talked, if you could call it that. Little things. The leak, the weather, her daughter's classes. My eyes kept catching on her hands again, the way they cupped the mug, fingers steady, nails unpainted. Ordinary, beautiful because of it. At one point, she leaned closer, handing me the sugar jar. Our shoulders brushed. Just a flicker of contact. My pulse jumped. And then, a knock at her door. She froze, mug halfway to her lips. That'll be Martha, she murmured. My friend from down the block. I stood quickly, too quickly. I should, but she was already moving, setting her cup down. The door opened, light footsteps, a cheerful voice. Oh, you have company, Martha said. Her tone was curious, but not unkind. Just the tenant downstairs, she answered smoothly, almost too smoothly. He had a question about the faucet. I kept my head down, muttering a greeting before slipping past them into the hallway. Back in my apartment, the silence pressed harder than usual. I paced. Saturday. Stood again. My cup from earlier still sat on the counter, a cold ring beneath it. She'd looked different when her friend walked in. Guarded, like she'd put a wall back up without even thinking. I replayed the moment, her shoulder against mine, the brush of contact that had felt like more than it was. Did she feel it too? Or was I just imagining things? Later that night, I heard footsteps above again, quieter this time, pausing near the spot directly over my room. I lay still, listening, wondering if she knew I was awake. The next morning, I bumped into her outside, both of us locking our doors at the same time. About last night, I started. She shook her head gently, almost cutting me off. Don't think about it. But the way her eyes lingered told me she was thinking about it too. We stood there, keys in our hands, silence stretching. For 1 second, I thought, knew she might say something else. A confession, an invitation. Instead, she just gave me the faintest smile, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and turned toward the stairs. I opened my mouth, closed it again. My hand gripped the railing, knuckles white. So close. One breath away from saying everything. And then, nothing.it happened on a Sunday. Late afternoon, the kind of light that turns the street gold for half an hour before fading. I was coming back from the corner store with a paper bag of groceries when I saw her standing outside, locking her door. She noticed me, hesitated, then said, "Going for a walk. You should come." It wasn't a question. We walked side by side down the quiet block, neither of us speaking at first. The only sounds were our footsteps and the crinkle of the grocery bag in my hand. I couldn't stop noticing the small things. Her hair moving slightly in the breeze, the faint sound of her keys against each other in her pocket. Finally, she glanced at the bag. "You buy the same things every week." I laughed. "That obvious? Bread, milk, cereal. Always the same brand." She said it without judgment, just observation. "Creature of habit," I muttered. "Safe that way." She hummed, a sound low in her throat, then stopped walking near a bench shaded by an old tree. She sat. I set my bag down and joined her. For a moment, she looked at the ground, hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "Do you ever think about what people assume of you?" The question caught me off guard. "Like what?" "That you're young. You're supposed to be careless, distracted, invincible. People my age look at you and think, he's just starting out, he has no idea." She paused, rubbing her thumb against her palm. "But you don't seem like that." I stared at her profile, the way the light hit the edge of her cheek. "And what do people assume of you?" She gave a small, dry laugh. "That I've already lived my life. That the interesting parts are behind me. That I should be sensible. Predictable." Her eyes shifted to mine. "I don't feel sensible." My chest tightened. The words were small, but the weight of them pressed hard between us. I wanted to reach for her hand. I didn't. "Instead," I said, "maybe people don't know anything then." She smiled faintly, but it was thin, like it cost her something. We sat in silence. A car passed in the distance, the sound fading quickly. "I shouldn't," she started, then stopped. I leaned forward. "Shouldn't what?" Her fingers curled tighter together. "Be here with you. Like this." The air between us felt charged, fragile. I swallowed hard. "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head, almost instantly, almost too fast. "No," the word hung there, raw, exposed. I thought of all the times I'd seen her above me, in the glow of her apartment light through the blinds. How close and untouchable she'd seemed. And now, here she was, admitting the thing neither of us had dared put into words. "I don't want you to think," she said, then stopped again, closing her eyes briefly as if to steady herself. "It's complicated." I wanted to tell her I knew. That I thought about the same things every night. Age, appearances, what it would look like if anyone knew. Instead, I said nothing. The silence stretched, unbearable and tender all at once. I could feel the words building in my throat, pressing to be let out. I started. Her eyes snapped back to mine. Waiting. But the sound of laughter cut through the air, a couple walking a dog down the opposite sidewalk. We both flinched as if caught. She stood abruptly. "We should head back." I nodded, though my chest ached. As we walked, the space between us felt different. Too much had been said, and not enough. At her door, she paused with her hand on the knob. Her back to me, shoulders stiff. Then she turned slightly, eyes meeting mine with a look I couldn't name. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. Neither did I. But the question hung in the air, unanswered, trembling between us. For a week, I didn't see her. Not at the mailbox, not in the stairwell, not in the coffee shop. The light in her kitchen still came on at night, but always later, and always off before I could hear the faint scrape of her chair above mine. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, then choice, then something I couldn't name. By the third night, I caught myself standing at my own window, staring up at hers, waiting for any sign that she was still there. When I finally did see her, it was in passing, her car pulling into the driveway as I was locking my bike. She waved, a small, polite gesture, nothing like before. "How are you?" I asked as she stepped out. "Fine," she said too quickly, the way people say it when they don't want questions. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She adjusted the strap of her bag and headed upstairs. No pause, no invitation. It should have ended there. But the shift gnawed at me. 2 days later, I heard her laugh through the wall. Not the restrained version I'd heard before, but loud, unguarded. Someone else was with her. I froze, halfway through making dinner, spoon still in the pot. A man's voice followed. Low, steady, unmistakable. I didn't move for the rest of the night. The laughter came and went, softened into conversation, then silence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the floor between us had always been this thin. The next morning, I ran into her at the mailbox. She looked tired, hair tied back carelessly, keys dangling from her fingers. "Morning," I said. My voice cracked. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "Morning." I wanted to ask, who was he? Why now? But my throat closed around the words. Instead, I just stood there, fumbling with letters that weren't even mine. When she turned to leave, I said her name. Softly, just enough for her to pause. She looked back, waiting, but I couldn't push it out. Couldn't risk making something real when I didn't know what it was to her anymore. So I just said, "Have a good day." She gave me that small, polite smile again, the kind you give strangers, and walked upstairs. That night, I started a message on my phone. "Can we talk?" Deleted it. Started again. Did I do something? Deleted that too. I stared at the blank screen until it blurred, the glow harsh against the dark room. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but nothing felt right. Nothing felt safe. I set the phone face down and left it there. Days stretched. I kept thinking she'd knock again, or stop me outside, or find an excuse to talk like she had before. But the silence held. I still went to the coffee shop, still sat with a book open, pretending to read. But the chair across from me stayed empty. One evening, I saw her across the street, walking with that same man. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head just slightly toward him. The gesture was small, familiar. I recognized it because I'd memorized it. They passed without noticing me. I stood there long after they were gone, my chest tight, but not breaking. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. When I got home, I sat in the dark, listening for her footsteps above. But the floor stayed quiet. I thought about knocking on her door, just once, asking, directly, what this was or wasn't. But I didn't move. The groceries on the counter stayed in their bags. My phone stayed dark, and the words stayed unsent that IT happened when I least expected it. I was carrying laundry down the hall when her door opened. She stood there holding a dish towel, surprised to see me. For a second, it looked like she might shut the door again, but instead she said, "The faucet. Still dripping." I nodded. "Yeah." She hesitated, then stepped back. "Come in. I'll show you how to fix it." Her kitchen was smaller than mine, but warmer. Plants on the sill, magnets on the fridge, a pan drying on a rack. She leaned against the counter while I crouched under the sink, turning the valve as she explained. Her voice was steady, but her arms were folded too tightly, her shoulders drawn up. When the faucet stopped, I turned, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Done. Thank you," she said. She didn't move. Neither did I. The silence stretched until it almost hummed. Finally, she spoke. "About the other night." I swallowed. "Which one?" Her lips twitched. "The bench. The way I left it." She looked down at the towel in her hands, twisting it. I didn't mean to shut you out. I leaned against the counter across from her, trying to read her expression. You don't owe me anything. I know. Her eyes lifted then, meeting mine. But I wanted to say it anyway. The air felt heavy, but not suffocating, just weighted, like everything between us had been waiting for this. I thought. I started, then stopped. My hands curled into fists against the counter. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that I'd made it bigger in my head than it really was. Her breath caught, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. No, you didn't imagine it. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her thumb rubbed the edge of the towel, my knuckles white against the counter. Then she said quietly, I'm scared of what it means. I didn't have to ask. Age, appearances, judgment. The weight of being seen. I stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. I'm scared too. Her shoulders loosened slightly, like the words had released something. She set the towel down on the counter, her hands now empty. You're too young, she said, but it came out softer, more uncertain. Maybe, I admitted, but I'm here. The clock on her wall ticked loud in the silence. She exhaled, slow, as though deciding whether to step forward or back. I don't want to hurt you, she whispered. You won't. My voice shook. Unless you keep pretending this isn't here. Her eyes closed for a second, like the weight of it pressed too hard. When she opened them, they glistened. Not tears exactly, but close. I lifted my hand, slowly, giving her space to move away. She didn't. My fingers brushed hers, the lightest touch, like asking a question without words. She let them stay there. It wasn't dramatic. No kiss, no sudden collapse into each other. Just her hand resting against mine, steady, real. She looked at me, finally letting the guard drop. Okay, that was it. No promises, no declarations. Just a single word that carried everything she hadn't been able to say before. And in that moment, it was enough. Time didn't flip overnight. It stretched, bent, settled into something we could both hold without breaking. I still went to the coffee shop in the mornings. Still opened a book I never finished. But now, sometimes, she was there too. She never ordered anything different. Black coffee, splash of milk. The barista still nodded like it was ritual. The difference was the seat across from me wasn't empty anymore. We didn't sit like lovers. Not at first. More like neighbors who happened to choose the same table. But our silences shifted. They weren't charged with all the words unsaid. They were filled with ease. A comfort. At 8:47 a.m. one morning, I looked up from my book and caught her smiling at me over the rim of her cup. No words. Just that smile. And I thought, this is how it happens. Not in a single moment, but in a collection of quiet ones. Her kitchen became more familiar than mine. The kettle hissed. Mugs lined up, the faint smell of jasmine tea filling the air. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes she would tell me a story about her daughter, half worried, half proud, and I would listen, fingers tracing the rim of my cup. One night, she asked if I remembered the bench. Yeah, I said. The walk. The question you didn't finish. She gave a small, wry smile. I still don't know the answer, but I don't think it matters now. We didn't sit on the bench again. We didn't need to. The memory of it stayed, a marker of where we almost lost the thread and where we chose not to. I saw her differently with time. Not as my landlady. Not as the woman upstairs. Just her. The one who knew I forgot to drink my coffee, who noticed when my shoes were worn thin, who could sit in silence with me for an hour and still make it feel like the day had meaning. I think she saw me differently too. Not as the tenant. Not as the young man still figuring things out. Just me. The one who showed up, who stayed, who didn't look away when things got complicated. We didn't declare anything. No lines were drawn. No labels pinned. But one evening, when I was leaving her apartment, she caught my hand at the door. Not to stop me, just to hold it for a moment longer than necessary. And that was enough. Months later, walking past the same tree-lined street, she slipped her arm through mine. No one was around. No one to see or judge. She leaned in, just slightly, and said, "Funny how normal this feels now." I nodded. Normal's underrated. She laughed, the quiet kind, and rested her head against my shoulder as we walked. Looking back, I can't point to a single day where things changed. Not one sentence, one touch, one choice. It was smaller than that. Like a faucet drip finally fixed, or tea steeped just right. Incremental. Ordinary. And maybe that's what made it feel real. Because when she smiles at me now, across a table at 8:47 a.m., or slides a mug of jasmine tea across her kitchen counter, or brushes my hand at the door, it isn't a declaration. It's proof. Proof that love doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it shows up quiet, pauses in the right places, and waits until you notice it's been there all along. And we both noticed.